Welcome back to the product and design track of Austin Startup Week. We will now begin our final session, how UX research is helping startups build the right product. In this session, startups will learn about UX, user experience, UI, user interface, and design thinking fundamentals, and engage in a deep dive into UX methodologies and best practices. We'll also discuss a custom approach to user studies and the return of investment of UX research with Liongard, one of Texas's fastest growing tech startups, and December Labs, the design and development partner chosen by innovative startups, growth stage in Fortune 500 companies. Now I'd like to introduce our speakers for this session: Marcelo Cordini, the head of the Texas office at December Labs, co-founder, Elizabeth Bowman, VP of Client Services at December Labs, and Matt Miller, Director of Product Management at Liongard. Thank you all.
Thank you, James. I wanted to start off telling you about my journey on UXUI design. I have been in the software industry for 14 years now, and it's incredible to see the evolution of UXUI design techniques and applications in the software world in the last few years. When I was a web developer like 10 years ago, all I had to code was just a mere feature description, plain text, nothing else. So me being a developer, it was kind of guessing how the product should look like using my own design taste or creativity. Usually after finishing up a code, I would ask my boss or client, what do you think? And they would ask for changes, changed colors, fonts, the whole interaction. And it was a waste of time, which means for them, a waste of money. And to be honest, my design taste was not great. So yeah, I'm an engineer, A few years later, I started working as a mobile developer. And thank God we started working with designers. But still, I remember some funny stories of my boss hiring just a graphic designer with some experience on web design to design our mobile app. And it was impossible to code that. Or when I was an Android developer at some point, and it was not enough to be an Android developer in this iOS market share world. I was getting the iOS design to code the Android app. The client didn't want to pay for that Android design. He was saying just iOS design to Android. He didn't want to spend more money on that, And also it was very frustrating to be a developer to code something that is not going to be used or it was going to be changed right away. Today, I cannot imagine a software development project without UX/UI design, which means validate ideas, validate features, prototyping, all of that before a single line of code. That's why we chose to discuss UX research for startups today. The idea is to share our stories and experiences on UX/UI design, and more specific on the UX research field. We're very happy to be joined by Liongard, as James says, one of the fastest growing tech startups here in Texas. So, hi, Matt. I want you to do a quick intro of yourself and Liongard.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with Liongard. So we are a software as a service automation tool for IT service providers. So really simple if you imagine yourself in the headspace of being a company providing IT service for other companies. Let's say you're doing IT for 50 other companies, you're dealing with 50 different environments, 50 different tech stacks. There's a lot to keep track of. You're trying to keep track of users changing, systems changing. We make that all a lot easier. In short, we inspect data out of all different types and parts of the modern IT stack and put that data all in one place and make it actionable for those service providers. As for me, I joined Liongard in the middle of 2018, so fairly early on in the company's life cycle. We had about 5 to 10 paying customers at that point. In the very early days, you're kind of wearing a lot of hats, even more than I wear now back then. But it took on the product management role. So my current role is director of product management, focusing on the roadmap, where the product is going, bringing together feedback and queuing things up for our engineers. But one of those roles is the UX design component. So that's where that kind of fits into Liongard's world, is the UX design component, and then figuring out where that fits into our processes, how it evolves as our processes continue to evolve. And that's some of the stuff we're going to talk about today.
Awesome. Cool. And then I want to introduce to you Elizabeth.
Thanks, Marcelo. Well, I'm very excited to be here today at Austin's first virtual startup week, and to be actually talking about UX research, which is one of my favorite topics. I have been the VP of Client Strategy here at December Labs for the past 3 years. And while I oftentimes talk to startups, entrepreneurs, companies on many different components of the product cycle, UX research has really been always one of the areas that I'm really most passionate about. And that also comes really natural to me. And I think part of that is because of my background. I studied economics with a focus on behavioral economics, which is very user-centric and tries to, consider and contemplate actual user behavior in those traditional economic models. Then I worked for 10 years in digital marketing and led a digital marketing agency, again, very user-centric, before crossing over into the tech world. And I think this journey is actually very representative of what you will find in UX research as far as people working in that field. You might find psychologists, architects, business analysts, but not only designers, as you might think. So yeah, I feel that in all my professional life, I've been really always very close to UX research, and I'm very excited to, about this discussion here.
Cool. Thank you both. I want to start asking to you, Liz, what is actually UX/UI design? Maybe you can give us a quick intro, and what's the difference between UX/UI? What's design thinking?
What a question. It's actually something that I often start off with when we have these kind of conversations just about building a product. And actually, I was just thinking about what you said earlier regarding your background in development and how development looked like before actually integrating with design. It kind of reminded me of what I have seen and learned, for example, in classes about Scrum methodologies or Agile. I think when you think a little bit about what happened during the 90s when most software products were failing, and then just a bunch of leaders from that space came together and really built the Agile manifesto to provide a framework. I think that was really kind of one of the first steps into the right direction. But while it was focusing on building a product the right way, still, kind of the thought on why rebuilding the right product was still missing. And, we don't want to be negative here, but still, there's numbers out there about 90% of all startups failing, and building the right product is really essential. And so that's when design thinking comes into the equation, and you can't really talk about UX or UI without just touching base on design thinking, which is kind of the overall mindset and really philosophy of anything that you're building today for users. And that is actually the thing that's its core. It's very user-centric, not even just user-centric, but human-centered. That is because really it kind of starts out from the idea that you have to emphasize with users in order to build something that they will actually use. So while design thinking that actually was kind of first invented in the late 60s and has been applied in many different fields, from design to architecture to teaching, it's really been just in the last decade that it's become something mainstream, something that we all talk about, something that we all say we want to apply. But it's also important to understand what is really behind design thinking. And it is this kind of ideal theory of us thinking outside the box. And that's something that always everyone says, well, what does that mean? How can I think out of the box? And one of the examples that I really like that visualizes that is, I think that's actually a true story. I saw it in a newspaper sometime, of a truck driver, smashing into a bridge because, just thought he could fit under it, but that didn't work. And then the emergency workers considering, how can we solve this problem? Do we, dismember the truck or the bridge? Which is kind of the natural thing that comes to your mind. But then there was someone walking by that said, hey, why don't you just, let the air out of the tires? And that was actually the solution, but it was not, what might come to your mind first. So design thinking is really this kind of mindset, really user-centric, but also, about just trying out different things and iterate about that. Now, when we talk about UX and UI, first of all, you might see that there is a U for user in both terms as well. So again, coming from design thinking and putting the user first, that's really what UX and UI are all about. UI design, though, is kind of what you might consider traditionally, the design that it's the visuals, it's the color palettes, it's kind of the final end product visually. But UX is truly the backbone and kind of the skeleton. It's the research behind it. Are we building really the right product here? So that as a quick textbook introduction here.
Thank you. For you, Matt. I mean, how was your journey into the UX UI design world? I mean, for Liongard,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, so for us specifically, I mean, we had, I think, a fairly kind of normal starting point, right? Whereas, kind of our co-founders and a developer. And I think the place I would start is that every startup has to do UX design research. In fact, is doing UX design research of some sort. It may be of wildly different levels of sophistication. You may not call it that. You may not think of it that way, but it's happening, right? Somewhere in the margins. So when we got started, and this is before I even joined the company, we had a very I like to think of bringing a new feature or product to market, as a pipeline. There's this finite set of things that need to be done in the right order to get this done. And in the beginning, every startup usually has roughly the same, very short, very iterative pipeline, right? It's the founders and an early developer, if they're not necessarily developers themselves, working a very tight loop and just kind of getting to an outcome, right? So that was where we started as well. We were very fortunate in that our founders were building a product for themselves, essentially. They both came out of the managed IT services industry, as did I, as did a lot of our eventual employees. So we have that kind of foot forward in terms of understanding our target market kind of from the get-go. But in the early days, there were lots of whiteboard session with the founders, the devs. It was a very collaborative process with a very small team. Once we had some customers, we talked to them a lot, right? That was really our first kind of step into UX research, was just, okay, we have 10 employees, we have 5 customers. Some significant percentage of our employees are going to be talking to these customers a lot, right? So that was where we started. And at that same time, in that scenario, where it's 10 people all in one room, it's kind of if that's the customer facing side, when we think about facing, engineering and design, it's really easy to change direction. It's easy to steer the ship in a tight curve when, you're all within the sound of each other's voices, when the sprints are very short. But as you grow, I mean, there are more people involved. You eventually have to processize some things. That's, one of the big things we've taken on as we've scaled so fast. And that's where I think we began to take that, UX design, UX research as a process, as a discrete component in that pipeline more seriously.
Cool. Yeah. So we have UX UI design. I will ask you, Liz, what exactly is UX research? I mean, what does it mean? What's the difference with what we are talking about?
Yeah, I mean, UX research, as I kind of tried to touch on before, is really kind of the backbone behind any design piece, any design product. There are many different ways of explaining it, but basically it's a tool set of different types of activities and an overall methodology that is, again, very user-centric and very iterative. But depending on the product that you're trying to build, or the company or the state that you're in, the actual activities that you might choose to execute might vary a lot. Really roughly, though, to give you an idea, you can differentiate in UX research between qualitative and quantitative research. So the qualitative research is really about, asking the question why are users behaving this way, or why there's that certain need, or why, are we seeing these kind of challenges? And then the quantitative research is a little bit more numbers based, for example, analytics or even, survey results. The other thing that you could that you talk about as far as different approaches is the attitudinal approach, which is listening to users and what they actually say, for example, in interviews. And then there's the behavioral approach, which is what you see users do, for example, observing them through observational studies. Overall, I think the most important thing about UX is understand that there is really, really a broad array of different tools that you can use, but it's really important that you understand what your problem is. Quick final example there. I've had projects where the overall observation was that the navigation, for example, of a tool was really the main pain point. So in those cases, there are UX activities such as card sorting, where you ask users to kind of sort all different kinds of terms within the website together into groups, so that you can actually understand what they associate with each other. And then you can see if the navigation reflects that, or if maybe one thing that they expect to be close to another one is actually in a totally different part of that tool. So yeah, the most important thing is really understanding what you're trying to build here.
Cool. Matt, for Liongard, when did the need for UX came up? How did you formalize UX, and when did the integration start?
Yeah, I mean, so like I kind of alluded to, it started when we really started to scale, and kind of once you get past the point, that situation I was describing, where everybody's kind of always within the sound of everybody else's voice, where it's really easy to interact with customers, just, without a process behind it. Once you start to grow past that, that's when we started to think about it, at least. And I think that was a valuable time to think about it. So as we continued to scale up, just continuing to build for us, which was kind of how we started. And then also with those ad hoc discussions with customers, it really wasn't enough. And there are a few reasons for that. One is that the cost, in some cases, of getting something wrong, kind of delivering something that's not on target, it goes up as you're biting off larger chunks of work, as you have more engineers involved. The cost of making a mistake goes up, and then also you have more users, right? So if you build something that's not quite on target, there are more people to let down. I mean, it's kind of simple as that at a certain point. So that's part of it. We're still, a very agile shop. We work in short sprints and do all that, but more people involved, it takes longer to steer the ship. There's kind of no way around it. So that having some additional UX process to help zero things in before you kind of put pen to paper on code has been valuable for us. So that was one thing. The other thing is, once you get to having 200, 300, 400 customers, there's just so much feedback coming at you. You can start building it for yourself, but even if your target market is very similar to you, you're still going to get a lot of different opinions. Suddenly, you're not just building for yourself anymore. And that's a dangerous trap to potentially fall into, as I'm sure as a founder, as a designer or product manager, for sure it is to think that you know better than the user. There's always huge danger in that, no matter how smart you are. So it becomes a bit of an art form of doing that UX research, taking all that feedback in, staying true to your strategy, kind of to where you see your product going long term, while listening and going where your customers, they're going to point out things that you didn't see. So that's huge. And then a part of unpacking that is, if you get feedback that is trending in a way that isn't what you expected or what you wanted, I mean, you have to make a decision. Like, is this something we were wrong about? Or is it something we just haven't convinced people of yet? Have we not sold the vision well enough? So it's not a silver bullet. You can't just, listen and then just do whatever they tell you. But you still have to have that input anyway.
Yeah, and what about you have everything well organized, your developers, your designers, and then these UX researchers came to your project. So what kind of the challenge to working with them that you could face,
Yeah, I mean, there were definitely challenges. A few of them. I mean, it'll eventually come back to that pipeline analogy I made earlier. But the very first challenge was really just kind of once we started to realize this, going to our executive team and going, "Hey, guys, we think we need to do some research." Like Vincent, who was going to join us today and wasn't able to because of a family emergency, he would be able to tell this story better than me. But when we first started talking about it, he's like, "Wait. I've been down this path before. Like he's designed a lot of products. He's been in a lot of those rooms. Research can be a bottomless black hole. Sometimes, right? So that was the first thing that he heard. And I mention it just because I think it is important, especially when kind of positioning research for startups to make sure that we zero in what we mean by UX research. What being outcome focused, remaining agile. But that was the first hurdle for us to get over, was to zero in exactly what was deficient about our existing process, what we need to get from it, and how we fit it into our culture of still moving very fast, still writing code and releasing things quickly. So kind of bringing that all together was the first challenge, I would say. But to keep building from there, I mean, there were certainly operational challenges as well. I mean, just the first thing that a UX researcher is going to ask for is, I need data. Who are your users? How do I get access to what is their behavior? And I mean, we were in the position of having all that data, right? But having it in a form that's consumable to someone who's kind of in a structured role around UX research is a very different thing than the data existing in a way that a senior product manager or senior developer can, just dig into the guts of the platform and kind of figure it out. So there is a challenge there to kind of operationalizing
for sure you were
UX
lucky.
research.
I can relate to being projects that we didn't know who were the users, So
Right.
you were in a lucky position. Yeah. So Liz, do you see the same challenges in other projects that maybe you can share?
Yeah, I think on the one hand, of course, access to the actual data, as Matt was just mentioning, but also access to the actual users, because just because you have a user base, it doesn't mean that, you might be able to reach out directly to them, or that you just have a group of beta testers already, at your disposition. And it's actually quite a common problem. One thing that we always try to solve for is from the client side, from the product side, to have, on the one hand, people that internally know exactly what the real scenario there is, and that we know that from the very start, because it does make a big difference. To give you an example, we work with a government institution where it's sometimes really hard to get access to the internal stakeholders that we have to interview, because they have, they're in very high positions, they have very little time, and in those cases, when we want to include them in some of the UX activities, we have to plan for that very, very specifically. Like these time frames that we have their attention for are very, very tight. So that's a totally different scenario than from when you have maybe a B2C product that where you have just a bunch of different potential users and can actually try many different activities and options. The other thing that has become more, I don't want to say a challenge, but just something to solve for, is the way that you conduct any kind of interaction with users, any user testing. I mean, traditionally, you can do that in person or remote. And while there's best practices for both today, with the pandemic, basically in-person user testing is not an option. So everything is remote. And again, that's not an issue, but it's something that you have to be aware of. For example, in what kind of environment is the person going to be that you're going to be interviewing about one of the products that they are using? Do you have to educate them beforehand about how this entire scenario is going to work? You have to be very empathetic with that person, because again, it's not that you're in the same room and that you can just feel really or that you can really get across what you want to do. One of the things that has happened to me actually just a couple of months ago is that we went into a study, and the person on the other side had sunglasses on and a scarf and everything. And it seems that we weren't clear enough on that. We also really want to read their facial expressions, because that's really part of what you observe. They thought that this was just anonymous, which it was, but not in that way. So really being transparent in that sense, and also having, for example, one moderator that's actually talking to the person, and another person in the same room that's taking notes, that is actually observing everything, just so that each person from the UX research end can actually concentrate on their main task. So again, there are definitely many different challenges, especially surrounding users, but with the right best practices and preparations, you can typically work around that.
Cool. Yeah, I understand this also for companies like Liongard, but how does it work for early stage startups? There is a question in the comment section asking about that. So how would be the approach for an early stage startup that is trying to build their MVP? What happens if they don't have a users yet, right? So how does it work?
That's actually a great question. And there are also many myths, I would say, about UX research in general, that it's too expensive, that it's only for big companies, it's only for companies that already have an existing user base. And that's actually not true, or just partly. It all depends on how you approach UX. For example, UX research can be a great tool to be interviewing potential users and testing whatever you're trying to build before you're actually developing it. So you're actually validating if all those assumptions that you made are actually true. As Matt kind of touched on earlier, when you were building Liongard, you were building something basically for yourselves almost. So you really knew what that user was going to look like, and that's, I think, how many startups and many entrepreneurs kind of start out with. They have a problem, or they observe a problem in other people close to them, and that's how they come up with this kind of idea. But just because you have this one kind of user story as an example, it doesn't mean that the entire population is going to behave that same way. So UX research can, on the one hand, help you validate your idea, and also give you the fundamentals to then, for example, go in and obtain funding. We've had cases like that where really early stage startups invested in UX and UI, and with that prototype, with that clickable prototype that you get as an output, they actually achieved the investments that they were looking for, because they showed that this was really something that they were onto here, what they were building.
Cool. Yeah, I would agree with that, and it's gonna steal a little bit from the kind of the point I was going to make at the closing. But I mean, UX research is a design tool, but it's also a risk management tool. So like for the very early stage startup, I've talked to other startups in Houston where they're thinking about just building an MVP product without having this clear sense of who the user is, without having clarity of product market fit. I mean, in that scenario, UX research is a risk management tool. It's like, validate that. If you're going to go pay a developer $100,000 to make something, maybe spend a little bit first to make sure you're going to build the right thing.
100% agreed. And also, I mean, there are many studies about how expensive it is, for example, to add a feature or change a feature once the tool has been already developed, versus going through that during the design phase. And actually, there are so many tools today. I think in some of the earlier talks today, they were also touching base on them, from Figma, where you can really, or Axure, where you can really create almost real life prototypes, that feel that pretty real, although they don't have the entire development and functionalities behind them. So yeah, 100% agreed.
Cool. So Matt, what's your first learnings on UX so far? I mean, you have been working for a long time now, and maybe you want to share some of that.
Yeah, so I mean, I think I've already kind of covered some of what I see as the benefits of the UX research. I think the thing we've learned is just you're going to develop as you grow a product management process, right? A process, that pipeline by which you get features to market. It's really just about figuring out where the UX design and research fits into that, and then understanding, gaining a sense of, as you bring more features, more ideas into that pipeline, how do you size them, right? Like, how do you kind of estimate the size and impact of those features, and which ones are going to be high impact to the users, and which ones are going to be high risk of building the wrong thing. And those are the ones where you're going to want to, as you're kind of diagramming out that design and development pipeline, go, okay, this one's high risk, or this one is just it has straight up a lot of screens, just has a lot of touch points for the user. So we're not going to be able to start, that one in the next dev sprint. We're going to need a sprint to design it, to do the feedback, to do whatever needs to be done, and then we can develop it. So it's just a matter of developing that kind of more sophisticated thought process, being ahead of your own roadmap, your own pipeline a little bit to get to a better outcome.
What do you think about that, please?
No, again, I think that this is one of the things is really that also with UX research, you can really pick your battles. And I think that's also something that applies to many startups that are just starting out and that are just thinking about, how do I approach this? I know that there is all these different possibilities for me to invest into UX research, but I'm still very early stage. So for me, in those cases, the recommendation is always to really start small. Sometimes it's just starting with one feature, the main feature of maybe what you're trying to build. You don't have to apply UX research really to everything, which is time consuming, which will have its particular return on investment, but still, start small, pick the one most important thing and validate that. Everything else around it might be complementary and also grow in the future. But yeah, really get your elevator, what you're talking about in your elevator speech, that will probably be the essence of your product. Do UX on that.
Yeah, one of the questions that we have is like, any advice on hiring out UX work for startups who can afford to take someone full time, that maybe they can work just 2 or 3 weeks? That would be enough for that kind of research?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think for UX overall, there's no one fits it all solution, because it will always depend on your objective, on the moment of time where your company's in, on your user base, whatever you want to try to do. For us, for example, at December Labs, when we're when we are kind of scoping out different types of UX approaches for companies, it can really vary, of course. But we have come up, just to give you an example, with our own methodology that is about 2 to 3 weeks, and that takes under consideration many of the common challenges that startups, early stage startups and entrepreneurs face, but also companies that are at a bigger stage, such as Liongard, but that maybe just want to test, one specific feature at the time. So the way that we approach these things typically is, on the one hand, really taking under consideration who is available from the other side, as far as the actual product owner from the client's end, or even test users, but really focus on just iterating on validating whatever specific assumption we have. And yeah, don't get ahead of ourselves. Don't think about the entire product, but just getting really into the nitty and gritty and into something very specific.
Awesome, cool. Yeah, I'm very happy to have also, like Matt, you are a product manager, and I love always the discussion how a product manager or UX/UI designers, they integrate with the developers and the, like, all together in the development cycle. I mean, we know Scrum, we know Lean, but I have seen different approaches on different startups or companies. Like they work all together in the same cycle, different sprints. So yeah, I would love to know more how Liongard organize themselves on all of this.
Yeah, for sure. So I think we've done a few things to kind of set ourselves up for success there. So one is that our kind of UX and UI design team is fully empowered to talk to our developers and our product managers kind of at any stage. Our developers in particular, we found a lot of efficiency by kind of making sure that they're cross-pollinating, and as we're developing prototypes and kind of developing those user flows, not having that be a silo away from development, kind of validating more in real time, that is being imagined is achievable. If there are kind of gotchas from the engineering side of, hey, if we do it this way, that's gonna be really hard, but if we make this one small change, it makes it a lot easier. There are definitely efficiencies there by having that all be one team. So we haven't gotten quite to the point of needing to have kind of like separate, sprint cycles. I know some companies operate that way. They have like dedicated kind of design sprint cycles. We're still more really project driven. Like I was talking about earlier, we can kind of pick out of our pipeline, okay, of the 10 things we're going to build next quarter or next month or whatever, these 3 are the ones that are going to need the attention. So these are the 3 we're going to pluck out, start on earlier, make sure that we have kind of that project plan for, okay, here are the phases of research and design we want to go through. But it's always a work in progress though, right? I mean, we're still growing, we're still learning. I think our process will learn and grow with us. So
awesome. I think we talked that it would be great if you can show us an example of what you are doing on Liongard, and it would be helpful for the audience. So how does this work?
That'd be great. So can we go and get the slides on the screen as well? Perfect, thank you. Yeah, so we just kind of picked out one concrete example of kind of one of those features, one of those projects I mentioned. So this is just kind of the platform. This is kind of deep in the weeds a little bit in terms of our user and access control, but this is a really good example of where UX research and design was powerful for us. So we're starting kind of from the before perspective. So this is what the layout of groups, access permission groups in our platform looks like. May look pretty typical, but if you look closely, you might notice a few things. So first of all, in that admin menu at the right there under access management, we have 4 different screens. We have users, groups, roles, permissions. And if you look at kind of the background here, you'll see that there are, these groups, one for each, what we would call environment in the platform. Point being, there's quite a bit of complexity here, right? This is something, was a permissions control scheme that was devised in the very early days of the platform, and we were kind of trying to account for any possible scenario, right? Like let's build something super robust so that as we move forward, we hopefully don't have to revisit this, but it ended up being very complex. So I want to show you the screen. So, as you're going in to create a new user, you're kind of filling out this simple form, but then you're picking those groups per user. And this group, you can't see it on the screenshot, but this group's kind of list can go on forever. There's a lot of complexity in here. So I picked this example because I think it's a good one for UX research, because it's not making changes to this is it's not strictly a user experience change. It's also something that would be very expensive to make a big mistake on, right? Like we're not just talking about reworking these screens, we're talking about changing a little bit how our permission model works. There's a lot of under the hood stuff that's going to happen with this change. So we wanted to get it right. It's kind of long and short of it. So as we continued through that, I'll jump ahead. So we started off kind of working with Catalina, our December Labs UX designer and researcher, kind of explaining to her from the product management perspective, here's what we think we need to accomplish. Here's where we think we need this to go. And that's always kind of the first step is laying that groundwork. But from that, she was able to build some prototypes. And that's what you're seeing here. So basically kind of putting pen to paper in a way that involved no dev effort, that was very low risk for us. In terms of cost and resources, but that made it a little real. So we were able to add in some things here of, okay, making these permission groups user definable. You can make your own, which isn't something you could do before, and just generally giving us something that we could then take first to our own internal team, but then to our actual end users, and make sure that we're covering all the bases, all the things that they wish they could do in terms of giving their employees access to the platform, making sure that that scope is set correctly, take it to them and validate it. So as we went through that process, like I said, we started off you should always leverage your internal team as much as you can. So we have a team, our product support engineers, who are the closest to our customers, right? They spend all day, every day talking to customers. They know the platform inside and out from the customer's perspective. So the first round of feedback and UX research was with them. So, okay, we have this prototype. What do you guys think of that? So we got through that, which led us to be able to develop what you're seeing now, which is more of a hi-fi mock-up. Okay, so we've heard that feedback. We've heard from product management. We've heard from support. Okay, now we have some hi-fi things. We can take that, and actually we did the same thing with the lo-fis. But then we went to actual end users and did another round of validation, and eventually ended up with something that is very robust. It looks better, first of all. I mean, there's no undervaluing something that looks great, but that serves the user's needs better. It lets them kind of define these roles and groups exactly the way that they need to. We've got research validated user stories. And like I kind of said earlier, a big chunk of the value there for us was de-risking this. We knew this needed to be improved. We had a pretty good sense of how, but if we had just gone with that instinct and built it, we probably would have missed something. We probably would have ended up having to redo something, and approaching it this way was a much more robust, lower risk process.
Awesome. Thank you. That was a great example for sure. So I would love to maybe, Liz, you can talk more about the benefits of UX and maybe the return of investment of working on this kind of project.
Yeah, actually, just thinking a little bit about Matt's situation, for example, I think that in this case, one of the direct benefits is freeing up some time from your customer support team that, was surely addressing many of the same items again and again. And it's sometimes just specific things like that where you can see the direct impact of UX. In just not needing to handle again and again the same customer problems. When you talk about the return of investment of UX, which is actually a topic that I'm quite passionate about, and that I feel that there's still a lot more case studies and articles to be written in the upcoming futures. There are, of course, certain quotes such as for each $1 that you invest into UX, you get 10 in return and things like that. I think it depends a lot, again, on where you're at with your company, with your startup. When you have a very early stage startup, as I mentioned before, you might be able to leverage UX to directly get funding. So that's, of course, a return of investment there. But when you have an already existing platform, it gets a lot more specific. For example, if you have, let's say, an internal platform that thousands of employees use, and through the UX research and the entire UX cycle there, you're able to save each employee 5 minutes per day in document processing. Just imagine what that's like salary-wise at the end of the year. That's a very specific UX, a return of investment of UX. But then there's also just the straightforward one of, if you're building the right product from the start, then yes, you will save on development costs later on. You will save on going to market costs. You will save on user adaptation costs. It really depends there on your product. One last scenario that is also important to keep in mind is when, for example, you're trying to build something in a very regulated market, or for example, in healthcare. You just don't have sometimes the luxury of trying it over and over again. I mean, even from a marketing perspective, once your product is out and the first reviews are getting into, the App Store regarding the initial usage, that is going to, kind of mark your path going forward. So the better you assure that you're building the right product, and I'm always coming back to that initial kind of, design thinking idea and concept, you will see return of investments later on. The size or the type really depend on what you're building.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah, I think we have 5 minutes. It would be great to hear from you, Matt, like next steps for Liongard in this UXUI design world, and your key takeaways from this talk.
Yeah, so I guess the key takeaways I would say are don't be scared of the word research. I think that would be the first one. I mean, research is what you make of it. It's really just talking to people who are in your market, who are believable buyers of your product. So that would be one. I would also say that this is not a return to waterfall style design. It doesn't have to be perfect. This is still agile. This is just being agile with research as well and input. So there still will be a point where you have to build the thing and put it out there and get feedback. And we're not talking about going away from that. In terms of next steps, I'd say that this is really a really important topic to us as we continue kind of towards letting our product lead our growth. So, I mean, product-led growth is kind of, I think, a growing buzzword. If you haven't heard of it, Google it. It's a good one. And that could be a whole other session at some other point. But basically boils down to letting your product kind of sell itself, right? You know, having a good trial freemium experience, having in-app kind of training, and letting your users and revenue come to you. And having a good user experience is a key part of that, which I think is part of the value that we see in taking this type of stuff very seriously. So that's what I'd leave you guys with.
Thank you, Liz. I will let you to close the session. I think we have only 1 minute left. So, yeah, next steps for you.
No, I can really just add on to what Matt said. You know, don't be afraid of UX just because it has the word research in it, but focus on the user part of it, the you. You know, really listen to your users in any way possible. And yeah, try and figure out what, you know, that there are so many different possibilities within UX. I'm sure that there's one for each type of startup, company, entrepreneur. Yeah, find your way through that and leverage this great tool.
Thank you. Yeah, I know we have some questions in the comment section. I will try to take care of that after this session. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you all so much. Thank you, Marcelo, Elizabeth, and Matt for that great session. As startups grow and upscale their work, UX and UI research becomes more and more important for ensuring the customer journey is being successfully managed and streamlined. It was fascinating to hear your experience perspectives on how to best research and implement these qualities in a product. And it was awesome to see how an example of how Liongard actually does it. I particularly appreciated your advice for getting started with UX research, as well as the different approaches leveraged in these studies. Thank you so much for volunteering your time to go into these subjects with us. Overall, what a great track today. Thank you so much to our sponsor for this track, December Labs. And thank you to all of our presenters for volunteering their time this morning. It was wonderful hearing you all speak. I would also like to thank all of our participants for their awesome participation and great questions. And finally, I'd like to thank Capital Factory for organizing all of these great talks. Up next for Austin Startup Week, we have the marketing and branding track beginning at 12:45, and I hope to see you all in there. But in the meantime, I encourage all of you to head to the networking section again. I'm going to go over the instructions really quick, but to network with other attendees, press the networking icon on the left-hand side of your screen. You will be randomly paired with another attendee, and we'll have 5 minutes to chat with one another. If you'd like to continue your conversation after your session, click the connect button at the bottom of your window, and you will both receive an email from Hopin that will help you contact one another at a later time. Once again, thank you all so much. I hope you have a wonderful day and enjoy the rest of Austin Startup Week. I will see you all in networking.